I love interacting with the community. It gives me a chance to actually, remember exactly what I'm supposed to be doing and why I'm doing it.
She is hoping to make a difference in the city she was born and raised. Good Sunday morning to you. I'm digital anchor Andre Ash. The White House and the city's demolition department is taking an interesting approach to the way it tackles abandoned properties across the city, and it isn't just about tearing everything down. Welcome to Michigan Chronicle News Now. Talk more about that and how these demolition efforts are impacting the community is LaJuan Counts. Thanks so much for being here, Michigan Chronicle.
Thank you so much for having me. Always welcome the opportunity to share the story.
Absolutely. So when the mayor came in, he had this big goal of really getting down so many abandoned, blighted structures across the city of Detroit. Where are we right now in that process as the mayor is within his third term in office? Is there progress being made?
There definitely is. We were charged with about 8,000 properties that we had to demolish and another 6,000 that we were expected to stabilize. And so we're probably about the midway point on the 8,000. And we're about a quarter of the way through on the stabilization side. So we're making good progress.
Yeah. So for those who may not know, what does that look like when you say demolition and stabilization? Because for so long, it seems as if the only way to get rid of blighted structures was you had to tear them down. But now it seems as if we come at a turning point in the city's demolition efforts where you're not just tearing down everything.
Right. We expanded our thought processes around blighted structures. So there are some properties that are definitely requiring to come down. They're structurally unsound, they're not safe. And so that's what the 8,000 is for. The 8,000 addresses removing those properties entirely. The 6,000 is the stabilization effort. And we completely understand that there's some properties that we can salvage and they can be renovated and families can move into them. And so with those properties, the demolition department is responsible for trashing them out. So we clear out all the debris from the inside and the outside. We install what's called clear board. That's basically like plywood, but it's clear material. So it looks like if you're driving down the block, it just looks like there's windows there. And the intent is for those properties to be sold immediately after we complete our efforts, so that whoever purchases them can move forward with doing those renovation efforts.
But aesthetically, it also looks better, right?
Oh,
than
definitely.
The plywood that normally would be applied to these abandoned houses. It kind of changes the visual of, if you will, of the neighborhood and of the property itself.
Correct. If you're riding down the street at a normal speed and you come across one of our stabilized properties, you wouldn't even think there was a vacant property. And that's the full intent. You want to restore that aesthetic to the neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. So it isn't just, and part of that effort was because the Detroiters were part of that process when they voted for a proposal in just a few short years ago for proposal in for neighborhoods, right? So it isn't just residential that the department is working on, but it's also commercial blight, and the department seems to be taking a more of aggressive effort at addressing commercial blight across the city as well.
So we have Proposal N only provides demolition or stabilization efforts for residential properties. Through the ARPA funding that the city received, we now have a campaign to address a lot of our commercial structures.
So that's federal funding.
Correct. In the past, the program for commercial demolitions was really isolated to those emergency situations only. So we were only able to address those particular locations that were collapsing into the right of way or going to collapse into an occupied structure. Now we have a focus where we can target all of those places that we know are ordered demos and have been historically vacant and open and just a danger and hazard to the community. We can address those regardless of the emergency. So we've already identified a little over 400 properties. We are aggressively going after our first 100 right now. And then we have some other locations that we've started to do some efforts on, Packard. So we are, yes, definitely have a much more aggressive campaign as it relates to our commercials.
So you've been with the city of Detroit for 26 years, demolition director for 3 years. I mean, how empowering does it feel for you to be in this position, the only Black woman demolition director in the country?
So initially when I took the role, we didn't know that. I wasn't using that as a basis for why to take the role.
You're just trying to get the work done.
Yeah, I always operate from my skill set. I know what I'm capable of doing, and how does that support the city's efforts, and how does that support the need of the community and the residents. And so when I came or transitioned to demolition from General Services Department, that was the thought. I knew that I've been in the city a long time, so I know whose skill sets and skill levels are where, and I felt like I was that person to man that department at the time. Still do think I'm the person at the time, but that's why I went. It wasn't based off of, well, I was the only woman or I was the only Black person. It was I possessed a certain skill set that I felt benefited the program. After getting here and realizing that fact, I was a little overwhelmed, because at that point I realized that I had become the dream of my ancestors, not really realizing when I was making those decisions and moving in that direction that's where that was going to take me. So it was initially overwhelming, because I knew that it was something that my parents would have been proud of, my grandparents would never have expected to happen. So for me, it's a sense of pride. I know I have a task that I have to complete, and it has to be completed almost flawlessly, because I've got not only my family, but I have my community who is looking to me to be that model.
Yeah, and in being that model, you're inspiring other young girls along the way.
Exactly. Now that is the reason why I chose to go to demo. I had been living a relatively quiet, under the radar life up until that point, and I realized I had done the community a disservice, because there's a lot of work, a lot of construction work that I have completed across the city, and people have walked through and they did not know that a Black woman had managed those construction projects. And I felt it was important for young Black women in the neighborhoods to know, like, listen, if this is what you want to do, you can do it. It's people out here, women out here, who are completing these projects. Don't let anybody tell you that this isn't, an industry for women and Black women to go into, because it exists. I'm here. And so that has become a hard focus for me, to make sure that young people across the city know there's a life for you in construction. There's definitely a life for you at the executive level in construction. It exists. And I'm always here to support that growth and development. So if you have questions or concerns, you want to come in and see what we do, I'm always open for that, because that didn't exist for me, but I definitely don't want it to be a barrier for anyone else.
Yeah. And in reaching those barriers and executing the work that you have to do across the board when it comes to demolition in the neighborhoods, that work is being done by Detroiters, right? Because that has been an ongoing conversation about, if we're going to put a lot of money towards tackling this issue in the city of blight, how do we, from an equitable standpoint, invest in Detroiters doing the work? Talk to me about how you're leading in those efforts.
So initially, that was one of the resolutions in Proposal N, was that we were going to make sure that we targeted a certain percentage for Detroiters. So 51% of the workforce needed to be Detroit residents, and 30% needed to go to Detroit-based businesses, small Detroit-based business, small and micro. And that's where the effort started. So of course, we were going to do what we said we needed to do. We were able to get to a point where we have really majority of our contracts are leaning towards Detroit-based businesses, and we have definitely met our goal of the 30% for small and micro businesses. And initially, it was really about making things equitable for those Detroit-based businesses that might not have had those opportunities in the past. But what we've come to realize is it's more than just that. Yes, we've returned that type of business and wealth opportunity to the community, but we've also exposed, kids on the block to trade positions or trade opportunities that they might not have thought about. You've seen construction equipment across the city for years, for decades, and they're usually not people who look like us.
So what does this mean for me with all of these different projects that are happening in my neighborhood? But now how can I get in to be a part of that change that's happening?
Correct. And so now we've got, heavy equipment and large trucks coming in, and they're being driven and operated by people who look just like the kids in the community. And so for me, that impact and the opportunity, because you walk up to a company and go, hey, I'd like to do this. Well, we've had, that transition from people in the neighborhood coming on as laborers and then progressing and becoming operators. And so that for me is what it's ultimately about. It started as just meeting that target goal for the money, but then it turned into something far greater than just the money.
Yeah. And you've also, in being in this role comes opportunities to share Detroit's story and to share your story about how you're making a difference here, but I'm sure to find best practices. You've recently been invited to the Toronto World Demolition Summit. So talk to me about that.
So it's funny, when we recently went to Phoenix and I was speaking with my team, we were trying to coordinate the whole apparel thing. And I told them, like, listen, I'm going to have on Detroit t-shirts. It's just a given. Every time I go out of town for, any kind of conference or business opportunity, I'm going to have on a Detroit t-shirt. Listen, it's about how the good things that we're doing here. And I don't think that gets broadcasted enough. A lot of the bad gets out, but very little of the good gets out. And so at that particular conference where we were at, I was making it a point to talk about how we're being so proactive with our Blight concerns and how moving forward, we have a plan to be able to maintain it throughout so that we don't repeat the past. And at that conference, an opportunity came up to actually present at the World Demo Expo. So we're looking forward to an opportunity to be able to showcase the efforts that we're making here in Detroit, but also to show them, the good things that take place here as well.
And at the Michigan Chronicle, we're always looking to profile the best and the brightest of us. When will the city see, I guess, a date of completion when it comes to the majority of blighted structures having been finding some resolution?
So we're hoping really towards the end of 2024. You will be able to see majority of that impact of those efforts that we're putting out right now.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to it because I can tell you, as a resident of the city, a native Detroiter, I've only known the city to have grown up in a city like Detroit of blight everywhere you turn. So it is quite eye-opening to see many neighborhoods across the city that are progressing because of the efforts that you are leading in the demolition department. So, Counts, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I do want to make sure that it's very clear. This is a true honor for me. I'm growing up in Detroit. My parents got the Chronicle every week. It was a really big deal. So to be able to be highlighted in the Black Dispatch, it's a big deal.
What can we say when you're doing the type of work that you're doing and being a Black woman and unapologetically doing so as well? We got to shout you out. And so
I appreciate that.
Thanks so much for coming through and stopping by Studio 1452. More of the story on our website at MichiganChronicle.com. Thanks so much for watching. I'm digital anchor Andre Ashby. Hope to see you back here next Sunday morning from Michigan Chronicle News Now.